Montana Territory, 1877. The wind howled low across the plains like it was carrying secrets too heavy to bear, and that morning, when Paxton Finley rode into the broken town of Briar Ridge, he did not expect to find a woman standing alone in the churchyard, her face turned from the sun, her scars plain in the light. He pulled his horse to a slow halt, boots hitting the dirt with a quiet thud. She did not look at him. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching nothing. Her left cheek bore a jagged mark, drawn down from temple to jaw, faded but deep. Her dress was plain, her boots worn, and her posture stiff like she was used to being looked at too long and too hard. He tipped his hat. "Morning." She finally turned her head, gaze steady. "Is it?" He blinked, then let out a small breath through his nose. "Seems to be." She looked away again. "Not for everyone." Paxton was no stranger to pain. He had seen it in the war, in the eyes of dying men, in the wreckage left behind when the world stopped caring. But this woman. Something in her still stood tall, even if the world had carved pieces out of her. "Name's Paxton Finley," he said. "Looking to buy feed and maybe a hot meal." She glanced toward the empty street. "Feed you can get at the mill. Meal. Not much left worth eating." He nodded, then motioned toward the old chapel behind her. "You the preacher's wife?" "No." Her voice was flat. "Preacher's gone. Town mostly too. Just me now." She did not offer her name. He did not press. The next morning, Paxton returned, saddlebag lighter from trade, but something heavier in his chest. He found her behind the church, kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds with bare hands. Her sleeves were rolled, fingers dirt-stained, and she still did not greet him. "You live here?" he asked. She kept working. "Nowhere else to go." He crouched nearby, resting his arms on his knees. "Place like this, alone. Not safe. I stopped caring about safe a long time ago." He studied her hands. Thin but strong. Skin rough in places. Her face had more than one scar. He noticed now a smaller one at her brow, another near her collarbone. She must have noticed him looking, because her jaw tightened. "Ask what you want to ask," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I was not going to," he said quietly. That made her pause. She looked at him then, really looked, and there was something like surprise in her face. She stood, brushing dust off her skirt. "Keziah Fallon." He nodded. "Keziah." She tilted her chin. "They used to call me scarred and unwanted. Not much use arguing with it." He stood too. "That's so?" She shrugged. "People say worse when they think you should be dead." He let the silence stretch, then said, "Well, I do not plan on calling you anything but your name." She blinked, then turned away quickly. "You can help me with the fence if you are staying." He did. Over the next few days, Paxton stayed longer than he meant to. Fixed her fence. Repaired the window on the chapel. Brought her coffee from his pack and jerky she pretended not to care about but always ate. She never smiled. But she stopped flinching when he walked too close. One afternoon, as they worked on patching the roof, he asked, "What happened here? This town?" Keziah wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "Diphtheria. Took half the people in spring. Others ran. I stayed. I had nowhere else." "And the scars?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "A man I did not marry. Left me for dead." His jaw clenched. "I lived." She said it like a fact, not a victory. "But the town never forgot what I looked like after." "You are not what happened to you," he said. She looked at him, eyes on his. "You say that now." He did not answer. Just handed her another shingle. That night, the wind rose again. Paxton watched the fire dance in the hearth of the chapel, where he had started sleeping. Keziah sat nearby, sewing a tear in her dress. Outside, coyotes howled. "You always live like this?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like you are waiting to be left." Keziah's hand paused mid-stitch. "I stopped hoping for anything better. I did not ask about hope, I asked if that is how you live. She set the dress down in her lap. What do you want from me, Paxton? Nothing, he said. Just to know you. Her breath caught. She stood suddenly, walked to the window. That is dangerous. I do not scare easy. She looked over her shoulder. Most men do when they see what is real. He walked toward her, slow and steady. Then they are fools. He did not touch her. Just stood near enough she could feel his warmth. You do not owe me anything, he said. Keziah's voice was quiet. That is the first time any man has said that to me. The next morning, he found her in the barn, kneeling beside a small grave. A wooden marker lay at its head. Another beside it. They were mine, she said before he could ask. Callan and Katie died that spring too. His heart sank. I am sorry. I was not strong enough to save them. He crouched beside her. You stayed. That is strength. She looked at him, eyes wet. No one wanted a mother who could not keep her children alive. Well, I do not know a soul who would not want a woman brave enough to keep going anyway. She broke then. Not loud, not dramatic. Just leaned forward and let herself cry, shoulders shaking. He wrapped his arms around her. She did not push him away. That night, Keziah knocked on the chapel wall while he was loading his rifle. You planning to leave? She asked. He looked over. No. She stepped toward him. Why? Because I want to be where you are. She stared at him. Even if I cannot give you anything? He stepped forward. You are already enough. Her breath caught. You are not afraid of what I am? He touched her face gently, fingers tracing the edge of her scar. No. I see you. And when she kissed him, it was not soft or shy, it was real. Like she had forgotten what it meant to be held and wanted someone to remind her all at once. He kissed her back, steady and sure, pulling her close. That night she slept in his arms for the first time, no distance between them. And Paxton knew, deep in his bones, he was never leaving. Not after that. The first snow came early that year, thin and soft, brushing the earth like a second skin. It settled on the chapel roof, on the fence posts Paxton had mended, on the chapel graveyard where Keziah lit a candle each dusk without a word. The town remained quiet, the way abandoned places did, full of echoes that didn't belong to anyone anymore. Paxton had moved his bedroll to the back room of the chapel, but most nights he didn't sleep there. Keziah kept a cot in the small room behind the altar, and after that first night she let him stay with her, not out of need, but something quieter. She didn't speak of it, and he didn't name it, but she no longer turned away when he reached for her hand in the dark. One morning, while the snow still clung to the grass, Paxton found her sitting on the steps of the church, a worn journal open in her lap. She didn't write in it, just held the pencil loose between her fingers. You kept records? He asked as he approached, careful not to crowd her. Her thumb brushed the edge of the page. Not really. Just pieces of things. Letters I never sent. Names I didn't want to forget. He sat beside her, not touching, just sharing the space. You mind if I ask about them? She shook her head slowly. Most of them are gone now. But I used to write things down so I wouldn't forget who I was before. Did it help? Sometimes. Other times it made it worse. Paxton looked down at the open page. Her handwriting was small and deliberate. A name was written there. Maribel. He didn't ask. Later, as they carried wood in from the shed, her voice surprised him. She was my sister. Younger by 3 years. Ran off with a miner from Helena when I was still married. I didn't see her again. He set a log down, then straightened. Did she write? No. But I heard from someone she made it to Colorado. That she had a son. She paused. I hope it's true. Paxton studied her face. You miss her? Every day. They worked in silence after that, but something in the air between them had shifted, less guarded, more bare. That evening, Keziah cooked beans and salt pork over the stove while Paxton cleaned a rifle on the table. The quiet between them had become easy, the kind that didn't need filling. "You always lived by trade?" she asked, keeping her gaze on the pot. "Mostly. Did some scout work after the war. Moved stock for a rancher outside Miles City last year. Nothing permanent." She stirred the pot, thoughtful. "You ever want to settle?" He looked up. "I think I do now." She met his eyes, but didn't speak. Instead, she ladled the food into 2 tin bowls and slid one across the table toward him. That night, as the wind picked up and the fire burned low, Paxton stood at the window, watching the clouds drift over the moon. "I saw a boy yesterday," he said without turning. "Near the ridge. Looked maybe 8, barefoot, watching from the aspens. Ran when I looked." Keziah stood from the chair slowly. "No one lives out that way anymore." "I know. But he was real. Could be someone from the Gros Ventre camp. They pass through sometimes this time of year. Didn't look like he wanted to be seen." She pulled her shawl tighter. "Then maybe we shouldn't chase him." "I won't," Paxton said. "But I won't ignore him either." The next day, Keziah baked cornbread for the first time since he'd arrived. She didn't say why. Just left a piece wrapped in cloth and handed it to Paxton without a word when he saddled up to ride the ridge. He found the boy again near dusk, crouched behind a fallen log, shivering. Paxton didn't approach. Just set the bread down on a flat stone and backed away. "You can have it," he said to the air. "I'll leave it here." He didn't look back until he'd reached the bottom of the hill. The bread was gone. When he returned, Keziah was mending a lantern by firelight. "You saw him?" "Briefly." She didn't ask more. That night she touched his hand with her thumb, just once, and left it there. He closed his fingers around hers. "You think there's a way back?" she asked after a long while. "For what?" "For the parts of life that got left behind." Paxton brought her hand to his chest. "I think we build new ones." She didn't speak again that night, but in the morning, her journal was gone from the step, and the front door was already open when he rose. She was outside, her breath in the cold, her face turned east toward the rising sun. A week passed without the boy returning to the ridge, but Keziah began leaving bread by the stone anyway, a small act folded into the rhythm of her days. She didn't say why. Paxton didn't ask. When she handed him the wrapped parcel each morning, her fingers lingered a little longer in his. The snow deepened, though the skies stayed dry. Most of Briar Ridge had surrendered to the hush of winter, shutters nailed shut, chimneys cold, doorways drifted over by wind-blown white. But the chapel remained a pulse inside that silence, its hearth warm, its windows lit at night. Paxton spent his days cutting wood and repairing what weather had weakened, a cracked beam above the altar, a rusted hinge on the barn door, the broken yoke left by the well. Keziah stitched curtains from muslin scraps and packed dry herbs into cloth sachets, hanging them from the rafters to sweeten the air. Neither of them said it, but the place had begun to feel lived in again. One afternoon, while Keziah was cleaning out the back room, she found a battered tin box wedged behind the stove. Inside were dried ink bottles, a rusted pen nib, and a folded stack of letters tied with horsehair string. She brought them to Paxton, who sat on the chapel steps sharpening his belt knife. "They're from the old preacher," she said, handing them over. "He must have written home." Paxton untied the string and read the top letter silently, lips tightening as he scanned the page. "He was writing to a woman in Dodge," he said. "Sister, maybe. Talks about the fever, about burying folks. Says he left because he couldn't stomach another grave." Keziah crossed her arms. "I don't blame him. He mentions you." She stiffened. "Does he? Says you stayed when no one else would? That you were the only one left who prayed out loud." Keziah looked away. "I stopped doing that." He folded the letter carefully, tying the bundle again. "Maybe you didn't need to speak it. Maybe just staying was enough." That night, snow began falling again, soft and steady. Keziah sat near the fire, her hair unbraided for once, falling loose down her back. Paxton watched her from the table, where he was oiling a saddle strap. "My mother was a schoolteacher," she said suddenly. "Taught in a sod cabin outside Bozeman. Said words had weight. That if you learned enough of them, you could carry yourself through anything." Paxton set the strap down. "Did she live long enough to see you grown?" "She died when I was 13. Fever took her in 3 days. My father remarried before the year was out. Didn't much care for girls who asked too many questions. He didn't speak. Just waited. I wasn't the kind of daughter folks admired," she added. "Too quiet. Too plain. Didn't weep when my mother died. Just watched the snow fall and thought about how she used to hum while washing dishes." Paxton stood and walked to the hearth. She didn't move when he sat beside her. "You're not plain," he said. "And you're not quiet. You've just had too many folks who didn't listen." She turned her head toward him. "You listen." "I do." The fire popped. Outside, the wind had gone still. She laid her head on his shoulder. "I can't remember the last time I felt warm in winter," she said softly. "You'll be warm every winter from now on," he said, not as a promise, but as a truth already set in motion. The next morning, Keziah found Paxton outside with a scrap of canvas and a length of rope. He was fashioning something across the back of his gelding. "What's that for?" she asked. "That boy. If he's out there, I'm not letting him freeze. If he'll come, I'll bring him here." She studied the sled frame. "You think he'll trust you?" "No. But he might trust what I carry." He reached into his coat and removed a small wooden carving, a horse, rough-hewn, the mane crooked but with care in every curve. "Made it last night," he said. "Figured he'd take a gift more freely than a hand." Keziah looked at the carving, then at him. "You ever think about having children, Paxton?" He tied the last knot on the sled. "Used to. War took that out of me for a long time. But now—" He met her gaze. "Now I think about it again." She said nothing for a long time. Then, quiet as snow landing on a roof, she said, "I wanted more. After Callan and Katie. But nothing came." He stepped close. "That's not the only way to be a family." She nodded once, then turned back toward the chapel. "Bring him home if you can." That evening, Paxton returned with the sled empty, but the carving gone. He found Keziah outside, lantern in hand, watching the ridge through the dusk. "He took it," he said. She lowered the lantern slightly. "Then maybe tomorrow he'll take more." Paxton studied her face in the flickering light. "Would you be all right with that? If he stayed?" She didn't answer right away. "Then, I'd like to see someone run through these fields again. I'd like to hear someone laugh." He took her hand. "Then we'll give him that. If he wants it." Inside, the fire was still burning. Beside it, Keziah set out 3 plates instead of 2. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. The boy came down from the ridge 3 days later, just after sunrise. Keziah saw him first in arms wrapped around his knees, crouched at the edge of the barn's shadow, watching the smoke rise from the chapel chimney. She didn't call out. Just opened the barn door wide and left a blanket draped over the rail, then walked back inside. By the time Paxton stepped out with a bucket of water from the well, the child was gone again. But the blanket was missing too. "He's not ready," Keziah said, pouring flour into a basin. "But he's circling closer." Paxton ran a hand down the back of his neck. "I'll leave the sled out again. Maybe he needs more time to believe we're not like the others." That evening, Keziah didn't light the lanterns. She stood instead at the chapel's front door, listening to the snow melt in slow drops from the eaves. Paxton came to stand beside her, arms crossed loosely, his breath visible in the cold. "I used to be afraid of quiet," she said, voice low. "When the house was still after my children passed, I thought I'd go mad with it." He didn't speak. "But now," she went on, "I find I'd rather hear the wind and the creak of wood than the sound of someone's pity. Paxton's gaze stayed on the horizon. "You won't get that from me." "I know," she said, and for the first time, she sounded certain. The boy came closer the next day. Paxton spotted him from the shed, standing behind the fence, eyes darting toward the open barn doors. He was older than they'd guessed, maybe 10, wiry with sharp bones and a wary stillness. His coat was too small, sleeves riding above his wrists. Paxton didn't approach. He just opened the barn doors wider and left a tin cup of warm milk on the rail. When he came back an hour later, the cup was empty, and the boy was gone. That night, Keziah sat at the worktable, sewing patches into a wool shirt Paxton had outgrown. "If he stays," she said, not looking up, "we'll need to find him boots before the snow deepens again." "I can ride into Judith Gap," Paxton offered. "There's a trader there who'll take leather or salt pork." She didn't answer right away. Then, "I've got 2 jars of blackberry preserves. We could trade those, too." He watched her fingers work. "You making room for him already?" "I'm not making anything," she said. "Just preparing in case he chooses to stay." Paxton nodded once. "You always do that?" "What?" "Leave space for others to decide." Keziah set the shirt down. "I learned the hard way that forcing someone's hand never ends well. Especially with children." Paxton leaned forward. "You'd be a good mother to him." "I don't know if he's looking for one." "Maybe not yet," he conceded. "But he's looking for something." The following dawn, Keziah found the boy curled in the hayloft, fast asleep, the wooden horse clutched in one hand, Paxton's old coat wrapped around his shoulders. She didn't wake him. Just covered him with a blanket and left quietly, her steps soft on the ladder. That afternoon, when he finally emerged, Keziah was in the garden clearing away frostbitten stalks. He stood at the edge of the path, silent. "You hungry?" she asked without turning. He nodded. "There's stew inside. Bread too. You can eat at the table or take it to the barn. Either's fine." He watched her for a long moment, then whispered, "My name's Ellis." She turned then, her face calm. "I'm Keziah. That's Paxton. The chapel's warm." He came inside without another word. That night, the 3 of them ate together. Ellis didn't speak much. Just shoveled stew into his mouth like he didn't trust it would stay in the bowl. Keziah offered him a second helping. He took it. Later, when Paxton stepped outside to check the barn doors, Keziah sat beside Ellis on the bench near the hearth. "You got any people?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "They left when the snow started." "Where were you before?" "Hiding." She didn't ask more. Instead, she stood and fetched a patchwool shirt, laying it beside him. "You can wear this. It's clean." He touched the fabric, then looked up. "You gonna send me away later?" "No," she said. "You stay as long as you want." He didn't reply. But when she walked away, he pulled the shirt into his lap. Outside, Paxton returned and leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching the glow of the fire on Keziah's face. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I think we were waiting for him, even if we didn't know it." Paxton stepped forward, took her hand in his, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Then let's build something for him to belong to." "We already have," she said, her voice steady. In the morning, Ellis was still there. He sat on the chapel steps, watching the sun rise over the ridge, Keziah's patched shirt hanging loose on his frame, and Paxton's old coat wrapped tight. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stayed. The snows thickened as December settled in, the kind that silenced even the crows. Paxton had finished sealing the barn door seams with pitch-soaked rags, and Keziah hung a strip of dried apples near the hearth, not for sweetness, but to remind Ellis of spring. The boy kept to the edges of the chapel at first, sleeping on a bedroll Paxton laid out near the stove, his boots tucked close against the heat. He spoke more now, but always in short answers, as if each word needed weighing. Paxton never pressed. Keziah never hovered. And slowly, Ellis began to stay in the room even after the talking stopped. One morning, Keziah handed him a scrap of muslin and a needle. "You know how to stitch?" He frowned. "Some." "Then help me piece this apron. You pull straight and I'll knot." She didn't guide his hand. Just set the rhythm, and let him follow. By the time Paxton came back from checking the snare line, Ellis had finished 2 seams. That evening, Paxton found Keziah in the back room, standing over an empty cradle tucked into the far corner. The wood was worn, the paint long faded, but the frame held. Her hand rested on the rail. "I thought I might fix it," she said, not turning. "Even if he never uses it. It should be whole again." He stepped beside her. "It's yours. You can make anything whole if you choose to." She looked at him then, and something passed between them, quiet, but firm as a hand clasped in promise. That night, Ellis crawled into the cot without being told. He left his boots by the door and folded the quilt over his knees, eyes heavy. "Do you want me to read something?" Keziah asked. He hesitated, then nodded once. She lit the lantern low and pulled an old book from the shelf, the spine soft with years. Paxton leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her voice smooth the room like warm wool. Ellis was asleep before the 3rd page. Later, when the chapel had gone still, Paxton opened the small chest he kept under the bed. Inside was a folded deed, creased from travel. "I bought 5 acres west of here," he said, voice steady. "Wooded edge, clean well, stone foundation already laid." Keziah reached for the paper, running her thumb along the ink. "You weren't planning to stay in Briar Ridge." "I wasn't planning anything. Until you." She looked up at him. "And now? I want to build a house. For the 3 of us. I want to wake up beside you, plant corn in spring, hear Ellis running through the trees." Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the paper again. "You're sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything." She didn't answer. Just leaned into him, eyes closed, her hand against his chest. And in that stillness, he knew she meant yes. By the new year, the chapel had grown too small for what they were becoming. Paxton began hauling timber from the ridge, dragging lengths of pine across frozen ground. Keziah sorted every tool left in town, sharpening what she could, bartering with the last few settlers for nails and hinges. Ellis watched them both with a quiet wariness, his fingers always busy carving or mending. One morning, as Keziah packed a basket with bread and lard for the day's work, Ellis stood at the door holding a worn canvas bag. "I want to come," he said. She didn't ask why. She just handed him the heavier blanket and nodded. They built the new house slowly. Paxton framed the walls by hand, driving each peg himself, while Keziah measured and marked the joists with a carpenter's pencil she kept tucked behind her ear. Ellis learned to mix mud for chinking, his hands red from cold but steady as he worked. The roof went up in early March. They cooked their first meal on the hearth 2 weeks later. Keziah stood in the doorway that night, eyes on the ridge, arms folded against her apron. "I never thought I'd live in a place built for me," she said. Paxton stood behind her, his hand resting on her hip. "It's built for us." She leaned into him, warm against the last breath of winter. "I like the sound of that." By spring, the fields behind the house had begun to soften. Keziah planted early peas and onions, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, Ellis kneeling beside her with a basket of seed. Paxton fenced in the west pasture, whistling low as he worked. One morning, Ellis came running from the woods holding a hen's egg, grinning for the first time since he arrived. Keziah took it from him carefully and tucked it into the larder. "You think the others will lay soon?" he asked. Paxton ruffled his hair. "They will. Everything's waking up now." In late April, Keziah stepped out of the house with her hands pressed low across her belly. Paxton looked up from the fence line, his breath catching when she met his gaze. She didn't need to say it. He dropped the spade and crossed the yard, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face into his coat, and for the first time, they didn't speak, just held each other, hearts steady in the hush of morning. They married in the chapel that summer. The pews were empty, save for Ellis and an elderly couple who came down from the hills with honey and wildflowers. Keziah wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin and lace, and Paxton shaved for the first time in weeks. The vows were spoken without flourish, hands clasped tight, voices sure. Afterward, they shared bread and berry jam on the chapel steps, the breeze warmed through the grass. Ellis sat beside them, his legs swinging, a wooden horse tucked into his pocket. That night, in the quiet of their new home, Paxton pulled Keziah close beneath the quilt he'd stitched with her help over winter. "I never thought I'd get another chance," she whispered. "We don't need to think anymore," he said. "We just need to live." And they did. Through the seasons, they planted and harvested, laughed and argued, raised Ellis with patience and care. When their daughter was born the next January, Keziah held her to her chest with tears that didn't come from grief, but from joy too long held back. They named her Willa. Ellis carved her a rattle from pine and painted it with wildflower dye. When she laughed, it was like the wind through tall grass. When she cried, Keziah held her against her heart and whispered songs only she remembered. Years passed. The chapel sagged but never fell. The new house stood firm. The fields bore fruit, the fences stayed mended, and the hearth never went cold. Keziah and Paxton grew older side by side, hands lined with the work of love made real. They kissed in the doorway each morning. They danced once each season, barefoot in the dirt. And every night, they lay in the home they'd built, with Ellis asleep under the same roof and Willa dreaming in the next room. They had nothing they'd expected. But they had everything they needed. And more.